Sarah Martinez had always been invisible in crowds. At 32, she worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company in San Diego, spending her days buried in spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Her life was predictable, quiet, and exactly how she preferred it. She lived in a small apartment overlooking the harbor, where she could watch the Navy's ships come and go while sipping her morning coffee. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah grabbed her usual chai latte from the corner cafe and hurried toward the downtown business district where her office was located. The sidewalks were packed with the usual rush of commuters, tourists, and military personnel from the nearby naval base. She checked her phone for messages while navigating through the crowd, her mind already focused on the data presentation she needed to finish before lunch. The collision happened so fast that Sarah barely registered what was occurring. One moment she was walking normally, and the next a sharp elbow jabbed into her ribs with enough force to knock her completely off balance. Her coffee went flying, her laptop bag slipped from her shoulder, and she stumbled sideways into a construction barrier. "Watch where you're going," she called out, more surprised than angry, as she tried to regain her footing and salvage her belongings. The person who had bumped into her was already disappearing into the crowd, a tall figure in a dark jacket who seemed to be in an incredible hurry. Sarah bent down to collect her scattered papers and check her laptop for damage. As she gathered everything up, she noticed something strange. Mixed in with her own documents was a manila folder that definitely didn't belong to her. It was thick, official-looking, and had several red stamps across the front. In the confusion of the collision, someone else's paperwork had somehow gotten mixed up with hers. She stood up and looked around, hoping to spot the person who had bumped into her, but the sidewalk was a sea of unfamiliar faces. The folder felt heavy in her hands, and she could see that it was sealed with what looked like government tape. Her first instinct was to drop it off at the nearest police station or maybe try to return it to whatever office it had come from. Sarah flipped the folder over and saw a shipping label on the back. The address was for a building just 2 blocks away, a nondescript office complex that she passed every day on her way to work. She had never paid much attention to it before, assuming it housed boring government contractors or insurance companies. Looking at her watch, she realized she still had 20 minutes before her first meeting. Returning the folder would be the right thing to do, and it wouldn't take long. She tucked it carefully into her laptop bag and headed toward the address, feeling good about being a responsible citizen. The building turned out to be more impressive up close than she had expected. The lobby was all marble and steel, with security guards who looked more like military personnel than typical rent-a-cops. Sarah approached the information desk with what she hoped was a friendly smile. "Excuse me," she said to the stern-looking woman behind the counter. "I think I accidentally picked up someone's paperwork this morning. There was a collision on the sidewalk, and this folder got mixed up with my things." She pulled out the manila folder and placed it on the counter. The woman's expression changed immediately. Her eyes went wide, and she reached for a phone with lightning speed. "Security to the front desk immediately," she said in a tense voice. "We have a code blue situation." Sarah felt confused and increasingly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, is there a problem? I was just trying to return something that doesn't belong to me. Maybe I should just leave it with you and go." Before she could step away from the counter, 3 security officers appeared as if from nowhere. They were all large, serious-looking men who surrounded her in a way that felt more like an arrest than a helpful escort. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," said the lead officer, a graying man with intense blue eyes. "There are some questions we need to ask about how you came to possess that document." "Questions? I told you exactly what happened. Someone bumped into me on the street, and our papers got mixed up. This isn't mine, so I brought it back. What's the big deal?" The officer exchanged glances with his colleagues. "Ma'am, that folder contains classified military intelligence. The fact that you have it in your possession, regardless of how you obtained it, is a matter of national security." Sarah's heart began racing. This was definitely not how she had planned to spend her morning. "Look, there's obviously been some kind of mistake. I work for Morrison Data Systems. I analyze sales figures for retail chains. I don't have anything to do with military intelligence or national security or whatever this is about. One of the other officers had been examining the folder while she spoke. He looked up with a frown. The seal's been broken, he announced. This document has been compromised. What? No, I never opened anything. The folder was like that when I picked it up from the sidewalk. I barely even looked at it except to see where to return it. But even as she protested her innocence, Sarah realized that her situation was becoming more serious by the minute. The officers were no longer treating her like a helpful citizen doing her civic duty. They were treating her like a potential spy or terrorist. The way they positioned themselves around her, the serious expressions on their faces, the hushed phone conversations happening at the edges of her vision, everything indicated that she had stumbled into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple case of mistaken paperwork. We're going to need to escort you upstairs for a more detailed conversation, the lead officer said. It wasn't a request. Please keep your hands visible and don't reach for anything in your bag or pockets. As they guided her toward the elevators, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in the polished metal doors. She looked terrified and completely out of place among these serious military types. Her reflection reminded her of something her grandmother used to say, "Sometimes the most ordinary days turn into the most extraordinary adventures, but that doesn't mean you're ready for them." The elevator carried them up silently, and Sarah found herself wondering if anyone at her office would notice when she failed to show up for her morning meetings. She also wondered, with growing anxiety, exactly what kind of classified information she had been carrying around in her laptop bag for the past hour, and whether anyone would believe that she really was just an innocent bystander caught up in something completely beyond her understanding. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor, and Sarah found herself being led down a corridor lined with unmarked doors. The carpet was institutional gray, and the walls were painted in that particular shade of beige that screamed government building. Everything about the place felt serious and slightly threatening. They stopped at a door marked only with a number 1547. The lead security officer, who had introduced himself as Agent Morrison, used a key card to open it. Inside was a small conference room with a metal table for chairs and no windows. A camera mounted in the corner blinked with a small red light. "Please have a seat," Agent Morrison said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "We'll need to go through some standard procedures before we can sort this situation out." Sarah sat down nervously, her laptop bag clutched in her hands. "How long is this going to take? I have meetings this morning, and my boss is going to wonder where I am." "We've already contacted Morrison Data Systems," said one of the other officers, a younger man with short brown hair. "We told them you're assisting with a government security matter and that you might not be in today." This news hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. "You call my work? What did you tell them exactly? Am I going to get fired over this?" Agent Morrison sat down across from her and opened a notebook. "Ms. Martinez, let's focus on the situation at hand. The document you were carrying contains highly sensitive information about ongoing military operations. We need to understand exactly how it came into your possession and whether anyone else has had access to it. I've told you everything I know. Someone bumped into me on 5th Street near the coffee shop around 8:30 this morning. Our papers got mixed up. I didn't look inside the folder, and I brought it here as soon as I saw the return address. That's literally all there is to it." The agent wrote something in his notebook. "Can you describe the person who collided with you?" Sarah tried to remember details, but everything had happened so quickly. "Tall, I think. Wearing a dark jacket, maybe navy blue or black. I didn't really see their face because I was looking down at my phone. They were walking fast, like they were late for something. Male or female? I'm not sure. It happened so fast, and I was more focused on not falling over." Agent Morrison exchanged a look with his colleagues. "Ms. Martinez, the timing of this incident is very concerning. The document you were carrying was reported missing from a secure facility at exactly 8:15 this morning. 15 minutes later, you somehow have it in your possession. Are you suggesting that I stole it? Because that's completely ridiculous. Why would I bring it back here if I had stolen it? That doesn't make any sense." The younger officer leaned forward. Maybe because you realized you were in over your head. Maybe because you got scared when you saw what was inside. I keep telling you, I never looked inside. Sarah's voice was getting louder, and she could feel her face flushing with anger and frustration. This is insane. I was trying to do the right thing, and now you're treating me like a criminal. Agent Morrison held up a hand. Nobody's treating you like a criminal, Ms. Martinez. But we have to investigate every possibility when classified documents go missing. Surely you can understand that. Sarah took a deep breath, tried to calm herself down. Getting angry wasn't going to help her situation. Okay, Fine, what do you need me to do to prove that I'm telling the truth? We'll need to search your belongings and run a background check. We'll also need you to walk us through your entire morning, starting from when you woke up. For the next 2 hours, Sarah answered questions about everything from her daily routine to her political beliefs to her family history. They asked about her job, her finances, her travel history, and whether she had ever had contact with foreign nationals. They searched her purse, her laptop bag, and even asked her to remove her shoes so they could examine them. Throughout the interrogation, Sarah kept thinking about how surreal the whole situation was. Yesterday, her biggest worry had been whether to get soy milk or almond milk in her coffee. Now she was being questioned by government agents about national security breaches. The strangest part was how normal everyone was treating the situation. Agent Morrison asked his questions in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. The other officers took notes and made phone calls as if this was just another Tuesday at the office. For them, apparently, this kind of thing happened regularly. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. Agent Morrison stepped outside for a hushed conversation, leaving Sarah alone with the other 2 officers. She could hear voices in the hallway, but couldn't make out what they were saying. When Agent Morrison returned, his expression was different, more serious, if that was possible. Ms. Martinez, we've run your background check, and everything appears to be in order. You have no history of security violations, no unusual financial activity, and no known connections to hostile foreign entities. Well, that's a relief, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure whether to feel vindicated or insulted that this was somehow surprising to them. However, Agent Morrison continued, we've discovered something unusual about the document you returned. According to our records, the information contained in that folder should have been impossible for you to access, even accidentally. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? The person who was carrying that document this morning was a Navy SEAL operative returning from a classified mission. The paperwork contains details about ongoing operations in 3 different countries, along with personnel files for active duty special operations soldiers. This is not the kind of information that gets accidentally mixed up with civilian paperwork. The room fell silent. Sarah stared at Agent Morrison, trying to process what he was telling her. So, what are you saying? That someone deliberately gave me this folder? We're saying that this incident was not as random as it initially appeared. Someone wanted that document to end up in civilian hands, and for reasons we don't yet understand, they chose you as the recipient. Sarah felt like the floor was falling out from under her. But that's impossible. I don't know any Navy SEALs. I don't know anything about military operations. I'm nobody special. Why would anyone choose me for something like this? Agent Morrison closed his notebook and stood up. That, Ms. Martinez, is exactly what we intend to find out. We're going to need you to stay here while we investigate further. This situation has just become much more complicated than a simple case of mistaken paperwork. As the implications of his words sank in, Sarah realized that her quiet, predictable life had just taken a turn into territory she never could have imagined. She was no longer just a witness to whatever had happened that morning. She had become a central figure in what appeared to be a deliberate security breach involving some of the military's most sensitive operations. The worst part was the growing certainty that this was only the beginning. Whatever had started with that collision on 5th Street was far from over, and she was now trapped in the middle of it whether she liked it or not. Agent Morrison returned an hour later with 2 new people Sarah hadn't seen before. One was a woman in her 40s wearing a crisp business suit and carrying a tablet. The other was a man in military uniform whose chest was covered with ribbons and insignia that meant nothing to Sarah, but looked very impressive. Ms. Martinez, Agent Morrison said, "I'd like you to meet Commander Patricia Wells from Naval Intelligence and Colonel James Rodriguez from Special Operations Command. They have some additional questions about this morning's incident." Commander Wells sat down across from Sarah and activated her tablet. "Ms. Martinez, we've been analyzing the security footage from the area where you encountered our operative this morning. We'd like you to take a look at something." She turned the tablet around so Sarah could see the screen. The video showed a street scene from above, obviously from a security camera mounted on one of the nearby buildings. Sarah could see herself walking down the sidewalk, coffee in hand, looking at her phone. "There," Commander Wells said, pointing to a figure approaching from the opposite direction. "That's our operative, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Thompson. He was returning from a debriefing after completing a 6-month deployment overseas." Sarah watched as the two figures on screen moved toward each other. She could see herself, completely oblivious to anything except her phone and the crowd around her. The man approaching her was indeed tall and wearing a dark jacket, just as she had remembered. "Now watch carefully," the commander said. "This is where things get interesting." On the screen, Sarah saw the collision happen exactly as she remembered it. The man bumped into her hard enough to knock her off balance, and her papers went flying. But as she watched the video more carefully, she noticed something she had missed in real life. The collision wasn't accidental at all. The man had deliberately changed direction to intercept her path. He had reached into his jacket just before the impact and had dropped something into the scatter of papers that fell to the ground. When Sarah bent down to collect her things, she unknowingly picked up the folder he had deliberately placed there. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, staring at the screen. "He did it on purpose. He deliberately gave me that folder." "That's correct," Commander Wells said. "Petty Officer Thompson intentionally transferred classified documents to you, a civilian with no security clearance and no apparent connection to military operations. The question is why?" Colonel Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to think very carefully. Have you ever had any contact with Marcus Thompson before this morning? Have you ever seen him around your neighborhood, your workplace, or anywhere else?" Sarah shook her head emphatically. "No, never. I'm sure of it. I would have remembered meeting someone like that." "Are you saying he knew who I was?" "We're still investigating that possibility," the colonel replied. "But what we do know is troubling. Marcus Thompson completed his mission overseas successfully, but something happened during his return to the United States. He was supposed to deliver those documents directly to his commanding officer for debriefing. Instead, he gave them to you." Commander Wells scrolled to another section of video. "This footage is from the naval base, taken approximately 30 minutes after your encounter. It shows Petty Officer Thompson arriving at the gate and reporting for duty as scheduled. He told his superior officers that the debriefing documents had been stolen from him during a mugging on his way to the base." Sarah watched as the man from the video spoke with military police officers, gesturing animatedly as he told what was obviously a fabricated story about being robbed. So he lied to his own commanders about what happened to the documents. "Yes," Colonel Rodriguez confirmed, "which means he deliberately chose to put classified information into civilian hands instead of following proper military protocol. This constitutes a serious breach of security, possibly even treason, depending on his motivations." The weight of the situation was beginning to hit Sarah in ways she hadn't expected. "So I'm not just a random person who accidentally got caught up in something. I was specifically chosen for this, even though I don't understand why." Agent Morrison opened his notebook again. "That brings us to our next concern, Ms. Martinez. We've been analyzing the contents of the folder you returned, and we've discovered something that makes this situation even more complicated." Commander Wells touched her tablet screen and brought up what appeared to be a military personnel file. Sarah could see a photograph of a young woman in Navy uniform, along with pages of text and official seals. This file contains classified information about a female Navy SEAL operative who was killed in action 3 months ago during a covert operation overseas. her identity, and the details of her mission were classified at the highest levels to protect ongoing operations and other personnel who worked with her. Sarah studied the photograph on the screen. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation style and serious brown eyes that seemed familiar somehow. Her name was Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. Commander Wells continued. She was one of only a handful of women to successfully complete SEAL training and was considered one of our most promising special operations officers. The room went completely silent. Sarah stared at the screen, her mind racing to process what she was being told. Sarah Martinez? But that's my name too. Is that why this happened? Because we have the same name. Colonel Rodriguez exchanged glances with the others. We don't think the name similarity is a coincidence, Ms. Martinez. We think Petty Officer Thompson deliberately sought you out because of your shared name with his deceased teammate. Marcus Thompson and Lieutenant Sarah Martinez served together on multiple missions over the past 2 years. They were part of an elite unit that handled some of our most sensitive overseas operations. According to his service record, he requested emergency leave immediately after her death and has been struggling with the psychological impact of losing her. Sarah felt like she was falling down a rabbit hole into some alternate reality. So you're telling me that this man gave me classified documents because I happen to have the same name as his dead partner? Commander Wells nodded grimly. We believe he's suffering from severe post-traumatic stress and has become fixated on the idea that sharing classified information about Lieutenant Martinez's final mission will somehow honor her memory or expose what he believes was a cover-up surrounding her death. Was there a cover-up? That's classified information that we can't discuss with you, Colonel Rodriguez said. But what matters right now is that Marcus Thompson has compromised ongoing operations and put you in significant danger by involving you in this situation. Agent Morrison leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, we have reason to believe that Thompson may try to contact you again. The documents he gave you this morning contained only partial information about Lieutenant Martinez's final mission. If he's planning to expose what he believes are the full details, he may need your help to do it. Sarah's head was spinning. My help? How could I possibly help with anything like that? I don't know anything about military operations or classified information. You don't, Commander Wells agreed. But he may not realize that. His judgment appears to be severely compromised by grief and trauma. He may believe that because you share his partner's name, you're somehow connected to her or meant to help him complete what he sees as his mission. The implications of what they were telling her were terrifying. Sarah realized that she wasn't just caught up in a random security breach. She had become the focal point of a disturbed veteran's obsession with his dead teammate, and that obsession involves some of the military's most dangerous secrets. What happens now? She asked quietly. What am I supposed to do? Colonel Rodriguez stood up and straightened his uniform. Now, Ms. Martinez, we need to discuss how you can help us find Marcus Thompson before he does something that puts even more lives at risk. Because whether you wanted it or not, you've become a key player in a situation that threatens national security. As Sarah looked around the room at the serious faces surrounding her, she realized that her old life of spreadsheets and predictable routines was over. She was now part of something much larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined possible. And there was no way to go back to being invisible. 3 days later, Sarah was sitting in her apartment trying to pretend that her life was normal again. The government agents had finally released her with strict instructions to contact them immediately if Marcus Thompson tried to reach her. They had also assigned a protective detail to watch her building, though they assured her it was just a precaution. Sarah had returned to work, but concentrating on data analysis felt impossible when her mind kept replaying everything she had learned about Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. The dead Navy SEAL had been 2 years younger than her, but from what Sarah could gather from the limited information the agents had shared, they had been remarkably similar in many ways. Both had grown up in military families, both had excelled academically, and both had chosen careers that demanded precision and attention to detail. The biggest difference, of course, was that Lieutenant Martinez had chosen a path that led to danger, adventure, and ultimately death in service of her country, while Sarah had chosen the safety of spreadsheets and predictable routines. The contrast made Sarah question many of the decisions she had made in her own life. On Thursday evening, as she was heating up leftover Chinese food and trying to focus on a mindless television show, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer it anyway. Sarah. The voice was male, rough, and filled with an urgency that made her instantly alert. Who is this? My name is Marcus Thompson. I think you know who I am by now. We need to talk. Sarah's heart started racing. She looked toward the window, wondering if the protective detail agents were still watching her building. I don't think I should be talking to you. The people who questioned me said, the people who questioned you don't understand what really happened to her, Marcus interrupted. His voice was intense, but not threatening. They don't understand why she died or what they're covering up. But you could help me expose the truth. I don't understand how I could help with anything. I didn't even know she existed until 3 days ago. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was quieter, more vulnerable. You have her name. You look like her. When I saw you on that street, it was like seeing her again, like she was trying to tell me something. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. That's not how things work. I'm not her, and I'm not a sign from beyond or whatever you think this is. I'm just a regular person who got caught up in your situation by accident. It wasn't an accident, Marcus said firmly. Nothing about this is an accident. Do you know where she was when she died? Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself drawn into the conversation. No, they wouldn't tell me any details about her mission. She was in Syria, investigating reports that American weapons were being sold to terrorist groups. She discovered that the weapons weren't being sold by terrorists or foreign enemies. They were being sold by her own commanding officers, who were using special operations missions as cover for an illegal arms dealing operation. Sarah sank down on her couch, the phone pressed to her ear. Are you saying that she was killed by her own people? I'm saying she was silenced before she could report what she had discovered. The mission report claimed she died in a firefight with enemy forces, but I was there, Sarah. I saw what really happened. She was shot by someone in our own unit, and then the whole thing was covered up to protect the officers who were running the weapons operation. The story was almost too incredible to believe, but the pain in Marcus's voice was unmistakable. Whether or not his version of events was accurate, he clearly believed every word he was saying. Even if that's true, Sarah said carefully, why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do about it? The documents I gave you contain partial evidence of what was happening. Bank account numbers, shipping manifests, communication records. But I need to get the complete files to prove everything, and I can't do it alone. They're watching me too closely now. You want me to help you steal more classified documents? Are you insane? I could go to prison for the rest of my life. You could save lives, Marcus countered. If these weapons sales continue, American-made guns are going to be used to kill innocent civilians and American soldiers. Lieutenant Martinez died trying to stop that from happening. Don't you think she deserves justice? Sarah stood up and began pacing around her small living room. Everything about this situation screamed danger and illegality, but she couldn't shake the image of the young woman in the military photo. If Marcus was telling the truth, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had died a hero's death trying to expose corruption, only to be silenced and forgotten. How do I know you're telling me the truth? Sarah asked. How do I know this isn't all in your head? Because you're dealing with trauma from losing someone you cared about. There was another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was different, more controlled, more professional. Because I recorded everything, Sarah. I have audio recordings of the conversations where they planned her murder. I have photographs of the weapons shipments. I have bank records showing payments to the officers involved. But all of that evidence is locked in a secure facility that I can't access without help. What kind of help? The security system at the facility where the evidence is stored requires two-person authentication. I need someone else with basic computer skills to help me access the files. Someone they won't suspect. Someone like you. Sarah felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, being asked to jump without knowing what was below. This is crazy, Marcus. Even if everything you're saying is true, I'm not qualified to help with something like this. I analyze sales data for retail companies. I'm not a spy or a hacker or whatever you need. You're exactly what I need, Marcus said. You're invisible. You're ordinary. No one would suspect you of being involved in something like this. And, more importantly, you have her name. That has to mean something. Sarah stopped pacing and stared at her reflection in the dark window. She looked tired, stressed, and completely out of her depth. But she also looked like someone who had been living in a safe, comfortable bubble while other people fought and died for principles that mattered. If I help you, she said slowly, and we get caught, we'll both go to prison forever. You understand that, right? If we don't try, Marcus replied, more people are going to die, and Lieutenant Martinez's sacrifice will have been for nothing. I can't live with that. Sarah, I don't think you can either, once you really understand what's at stake. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to think clearly about what she was being asked to do. Every rational part of her mind was screaming that she should hang up the phone and call Agent Morrison immediately. But another part of her, a part she hadn't known existed until this week, was wondering what Lieutenant Sarah Martinez would have done in this situation. Where would we meet? She heard herself asking, as if someone else was speaking with her voice. There's a parking garage downtown, corner of 7th and Market. Level 3, Section B, tomorrow night at 11 o'clock. Come alone, and don't tell anyone about this conversation. Marcus, wait, but the line had already gone dead. Sarah stared at her phone, realizing that she had just agreed to meet with a potentially dangerous fugitive to help him steal classified military documents. The quiet, predictable life she had built for herself was about to become a memory, replaced by something she couldn't even imagine. As she sat in her apartment that night, unable to sleep, Sarah found herself thinking about the roads not taken in her own life. She had always chosen safety over adventure, comfort over challenge, invisibility over recognition. But now she was being given a chance to step into the kind of life that Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had lived, a life where choices mattered and actions had real consequences for other people. The question was whether she had the courage to become the kind of person who could make that choice. The parking garage at 7th and Market was dimly lit and nearly empty at 11 o'clock on Friday night. Sarah's footsteps echoed off the concrete walls as she made her way to Level 3, Section B. She had spent the entire day second-guessing her decision, but somehow she kept moving forward, driven by a combination of curiosity, guilt, and something she couldn't quite name. Marcus was waiting beside a dark sedan, wearing civilian clothes that made him look more like a businessman than a Navy SEAL. Up close, she could see the strain in his face, the deep lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he constantly scanned their surroundings for threats. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted. "I'm still not sure this is the right thing to do." Marcus opened the passenger door for her. "Let me show you something that might help you decide." They drove in silence through the empty downtown streets until they reached a warehouse district that Sarah had never visited before. Marcus parked behind a building that looked abandoned, its windows boarded up and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot. "This is where they're storing the evidence," he said. "The building looks empty, but the basement houses a secure government archive facility. Most people don't even know it exists." They walked around to a side entrance where Marcus produced a key card and a small electronic device. "I still have access because officially I'm supposed to be here reviewing mission files for my debriefing. But the security system requires 2 people to access the most classified materials." The entrance led to a stairwell that descended several levels below ground. At the bottom was a heavy steel door with multiple locks and a sophisticated electronic panel. Marcus inserted his key card and placed his hand on a biometric scanner. "Your turn," he said, gesturing to a second scanner. "Just put your palm on the glass and look into the camera." Sarah hesitated. "Won't this create a record that I was here?" "The system will log 2 people accessing the facility, but It won't record your identity since you're not in the database. As far as the computers are concerned, you'll just be listed as authorized accompanying personnel. Sarah placed her hand on the scanner and looked into the camera. A green light flashed, and she heard the sound of multiple locks disengaging. The heavy door swung open to reveal a corridor lined with filing cabinets and computer terminals. Marcus led her to a workstation at the far end of the room and began typing commands into the computer. "Everything about Lieutenant Martinez's final mission is in here," he said. "But I need you to help me copy the files to an external drive while I access the audio recordings." For the next hour, Sarah found herself deeper in illegal activity than she had ever imagined possible. She copied hundreds of documents while Marcus pulled up audio files and played them through headphones, occasionally writing notes on a pad of paper. "Listen to this," he said finally, handing her the headphones. The recording was poor quality, obviously made with hidden equipment in difficult conditions. But Sarah could clearly hear multiple voices discussing logistics for weapon shipments, payment schedules, and the need to handle someone who was asking too many questions. "That's Lieutenant Martinez they're talking about," Marcus explained. She had started asking questions about discrepancies in the weapons inventory. 3 days after this recording was made, she was dead. Sarah listened to more recordings, each one building a clearer picture of a conspiracy that involved at least 6 high-ranking military officers and millions of dollars in illegal weapons sales. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. "Why haven't you taken this to the authorities before now?" Sarah asked. "Because some of the people involved are the authorities," Marcus replied bitterly. The investigation into Lieutenant Martinez's death was conducted by officers who were part of the weapons operation. They controlled the entire process from beginning to end. As they finished copying the files, Sarah began to understand why Marcus had been so desperate to expose the truth. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez hadn't just died in the line of duty. She had been murdered by her own colleagues to protect a criminal enterprise that was still ongoing. "What happens now?" Sarah asked as they prepared to leave the facility. "Now we take this evidence to someone who can act on it without being compromised by the people involved. I have contacts in the Inspector General's office and the FBI who can launch an independent investigation." They were halfway up the stairwell when they heard voices coming from above. Marcus immediately stopped and held up a hand for silence. Someone was in the building, and they weren't supposed to be there. "Emergency exit," Marcus whispered, pointing to a door marked with a red sign. "It leads to an alley behind the building." They crept through the emergency exit and found themselves in a narrow alley between 2 warehouses. As they made their way toward the street, Sarah could see flashlight beams moving inside the building they had just left. "How did they know we were here?" she whispered. "Someone's been monitoring my activities more closely than I realized," Marcus replied grimly. "We need to get you somewhere safe and get this evidence to the right people before they figure out what we discovered." They made it back to Marcus's car and drove quickly through the deserted streets. But as they approached downtown, Sarah noticed other vehicles that seemed to be following the same route they were taking. "Marcus, I think we're being followed." He checked his mirrors and cursed under his breath. "You're right. They must have been watching the facility." The next 20 minutes felt like a chase scene from a movie. Marcus drove through the city with the skill of someone trained in evasive driving, taking sudden turns and using his knowledge of back alleys to stay ahead of their pursuers. But it became clear that they weren't going to be able to outrun their followers indefinitely. "I'm going to drop you off at a safe location," Marcus said as they pulled into the parking garage of a large hotel. "Take this drive and keep it safe. If something happens to me, make sure it gets to Agent Patricia Wells at Naval Intelligence. She's one of the few people in authority I still trust." Sarah took the external drive with shaking hands. "What about you?" "I'm going to lead them away from you and try to make contact with my FBI contacts. This ends tonight, one way or another." Before Sarah could protest, Marcus was out of the car and disappearing into the maze of the parking garage. She could hear the sound of other vehicles entering the garage, but she followed his instructions and took the elevator up to the hotel lobby. 2 hours later, she was sitting in Agent Morrison's office again, but this time the dynamic was completely different. She had called him from the hotel and explained everything that had happened, including her decision to help Marcus access the classified files. Agent Morrison listened to her story without interruption, occasionally taking notes, but mostly just letting her talk. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Ms. Martinez," he said finally, "what you did tonight was illegal and dangerous. Under normal circumstances, you would be facing serious federal charges." "I know that," Sarah replied. "But I couldn't just walk away once I understood what had really happened to Lieutenant Martinez." Agent Morrison nodded slowly. "The evidence you've provided confirms suspicions that have been developing within naval intelligence for some time. We've been investigating irregularities in special operations logistics, but we didn't have proof of the scope of the problem until tonight." "What about Marcus? Is he safe?" "Petty Officer Thompson is in protective custody. He made contact with FBI agents shortly after you separated, and he's currently providing testimony about everything he witnessed overseas. The weapons trafficking operation has been shut down, and arrests are being made as we speak." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. "So, it's over. The criminal investigation is just beginning, but yes, the immediate danger is over. Lieutenant Martinez's death will be reinvestigated by an independent team, and the people responsible for her murder will be brought to justice." Agent Morrison closed his notebook and looked directly at Sarah. "I have to ask you something, though. What made you decide to help Thompson when you knew how risky it was?" Sarah thought about the question for a moment. "I kept thinking about Lieutenant Sarah Martinez and the choices she made. She chose to risk her life to expose the truth, even though she knew it was dangerous. I realized that I had been making safe choices my whole life, but this was a situation where the safe choice was also the wrong choice. And now I know that I'm capable of more than I thought I was. I'm not sure what that means for my future, but I know I can't go back to pretending that my only responsibility is to myself." 6 months later, Sarah was working for a nonprofit organization that helped military veterans transition to civilian life. She had left her job at the data analysis company and used the experience from her involvement in the weapons trafficking case to find work that felt meaningful. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez's story had eventually become public knowledge, and she had been posthumously awarded the Navy Cross for her courage in exposing the criminal conspiracy that led to her death. The officers involved in the weapons trafficking operation had been court-martialed and sentenced to long prison terms. Marcus Thompson had been given an honorable discharge and was receiving treatment for PTSD while working with prosecutors to ensure that all aspects of the criminal network were fully exposed. He and Sarah had become friends, bonded by their shared experience and their commitment to honoring Lieutenant Martinez's memory. Sarah kept a photo of Lieutenant Sarah Martinez on her desk at work, not because she believed in mystical connections or signs from beyond, but because it reminded her that ordinary people could choose to do extraordinary things when a situation demanded it. The collision on 5th Street had changed her life in ways she never could have anticipated, but she had learned that sometimes the most important moments are the ones that force you to decide what kind of person you really want to be. The case had taught her that heroism wasn't about seeking out danger or adventure. It was about recognizing when your actions could make a difference for other people and having the courage to act on that recognition, even when the personal cost was high. In the end, that was the real lesson she had learned from both versions of Sarah Martinez, the one who had died fighting for justice and the one who had chosen to continue that fight.